Back with me, South Carolina Congressman Trey Gowdy. We've been talking about Lois Lerner. Congressman, I was looking at some of the emails and the testimony of IRS officials that apparently you have access to, which indicate that this isn't just a kangaroo investigation, that there is some meat to the allegations here. What can you tell us?
Well, it all started with the president criticizing the Citizens United Supreme Court decision in his State of the Union. And as you remember, Judge, it's very unusual for a president to criticize Supreme Court justices to their faces, which is what he did. And so that signaled to the IRS and others it's open season on Citizens United. There are emails from Lois Lerner where she says perhaps the FEC, which is the Federal Election Commission, will save the day. Save the day for whom? There are emails that she got about Democrats maybe losing the Senate. And her response was that would be worse than a Republican president. There are emails where she said we need a project, but we don't need that project to appear per se political. And
Congressman, she actually uses in some of the emails the Koch brothers' names. She says we need to fix this now before the election. What was she talking about there?
Shutting up conservative voices. That is exactly what this is about. She is a card-carrying Democrat. She did not want the president to lose, and she did not want the Republicans to take over the Senate. So when she says we need a project, but it doesn't need to appear per se political, her project was to shut up conservative voices.
Frustrating. It has to be frustrating for you as a prosecutor. But I'm going to move on from that, Congressman. Yesterday at CPAC, Rand Paul won the straw poll for the second year in a row. Take a listen.
There is a great and tumultuous battle underway for the future, not of the Republican Party, but the future of the entire country.
All right. Do you think Rand Paul is going to run in 2016?
I hope he does.
You do?
I think he will. Sure. I want all the different voices, many of whom spoke at CPAC. I'll throw Tim Scott in that mix as well. I want all the voices on a stage treating one another with respect and civility, and let our fellow citizens decide who has the best vision for our country.
And you know what, Congressman, the public wants politicians to treat each other with respect and civility, but it's almost as though now people are looking back and saying, you know, there are so many of these debates and primary debates that it kind of works against the candidates in the end. I mean, do you think they should reduce the number of debates?
Yes, and I think we ought to behave better during the few that we have. So, yeah, I mean, we can't beat each other up and then expect everything to be, you know, and then sing Kumbaya for a couple of months before the general election. I think there ought to be fewer debates, and I think there ought to be better questions during the debates, which rules out most of the media types asking the questions. Fewer, more civility, more grace, and you know, let people know what you're for, not just what you're against.
And that was the message at CPAC as well. But before I finish up with CPAC, let me ask you a question about Marco Rubio. He came in, I think, second last year, and this year he was second or third from the bottom. What do you attribute that to?
Probably his pursuit of immigration reform. And look, I understand people being critical of that. They're critical of me because I'm on a judiciary committee that's having hearings about immigration reform. But I think Marco Rubio is an incredibly talented public official. And I hope he runs for president. I hope he's one of the voices up there. There's not a nicer person that I have met other than Tim Scott in Washington than Marco Rubio. So you know, people can not like him if they want. I just have my preference is not to rule people out because you disagree with them on one issue.
Mm-hmm. Well, unfortunately, the electorate often votes on one issue. But in closing, I'm going to ask you about this executive overreach bill that you are sponsoring. Talk to me about this.
Well, Judge, Congress does not pass suggestions, and we don't pass ideas, and we're not a debating society. We pass laws. and the Constitution requires the executive to faithfully execute those laws. And when he or she does not, Congress ought to stick up for itself. You know, people talk about the power of the purse and impeachment. Those are punishments. I want the president to do his job, which is to faithfully execute the law. This bill allows us to go to court and get a judicial entity, the judicial branch, to order the executive branch to do what the Constitution requires him to do.
Okay, so what you're saying is when the president goes beyond a law, changing a law, that this bill would allow Congress to go to a judge and have the judge stop that. If that were the law today, what specifically do you see yourself or Congress going to a judge to prevent the president from implementing or to force him to enforce?
Well, individual members of Congress don't have standing, but hopefully the body itself does. Look at the Affordable Care Act. Look at the waivers and the exemptions and the delays. Exactly. Look at the immigration law. I mean, if you want to have immigration reform, what guarantee do you have that any president, this one or others, is actually going to enforce what you come up with? Look at the mandatory minimum drug laws that Eric Holder said he wasn't going to follow anymore. The executive branch, if you want to write laws, run for Congress. Your job is to faithfully execute them. And that's 3 areas that we just mentioned that they're not doing it.
Right, right. All right. Congressman Trey Gowdy, always good to talk to you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Yes, ma'am.
And coming up is terrorism to blame for the mysterious disappearance of the Malaysian Airlines flight.